Althusser's key contributions are cited down the left-hand side here, and we're going to see how he contrasts with Gramsci and help us to understand this scientific Marxism, which contrasts with Gramsci's humanistic Marxism. You've all seen this image before, the idea that people are puppets controlled by society, by institutions. Althusser, as a structural Marxist, sees human choice as limited. The focus here is more on the determinism of institutions from the social structure. You know, we talk about people in society, and the big focus being on those capital letters, society being the main focus, and that's where Althusser is coming from. We should aim to look at how these structures work. Marxism should try to look at these institutions and focus on their effect, their power. And Althusser, though he does reject both economic determinism, because he doesn't believe that everything is totally controlled by the economy, and he also plays down the nature of ideas and humanism. The first starting point to think about Althusser is how he offers a critique of the base superstructure model. You might remember that Marx sees the economy of society, and everything else is built on top of that model. That the institutions of society just reflect the relationships that take place in the economy. Hence, we look at correspondence principle. We see a pyramid of a hierarchy of inequality. If that's the nature of the economy, that will reflect itself in the other institutions. But he sees it as more complex. He says that capitalist society has three levels, it has three structures. The economic level, that's to do with industry and business and all activities in terms of producing something to satisfy a need. So the economy. Then we've got the political level, which is all about how do we organise resources for our survival. And he is mainly talking there about government and the state and powers that be. And the ideological level, the ways that people see themselves and the world, the nature of ideas. And these, you can imagine that these like three circles in a Venn diagram, and there are overlaps, but the circles can shift and move. They don't always overlap in the same place. In the base superstructure model, the economy determines all, but in this model, the political and ideological levels have a degree of freedom from the economy. And he calls this relative autonomy. That means that they've got relative freedom. There are at times they can separate away from the economy, they can break away, and at times they can slide back again and support the economy. And that's useful when we look at religion as well, which I'll come back to later. Ideological and repressive state apparatus, we've all heard of these ideas before. The economic level of society dominates in capitalism, but the political and ideological are very important too. Workers, they must be socialised to be obedient and punished when they rebel. So we need some way of socialising them and some way of punishing and controlling them. And the state performs two key functions to ensure capitalism does survive. It has two apparatus at play which enable it to, support the political and the ideological levels, but makes it to ensure that people obey. There's a repressive state apparatus. These are the police and the army, armed bodies of men that use force and coerce the working class to conform. So the criminal justice system is very much part of that. It's there to repress. But when that fails, most of the time though that isn't needed. Most of the time we don't see the armed forces. If you think about the coronavirus situation at the moment, there's all this threat of lockdown all the time. There's this threat that the army are going to be on the streets. And the reason that is there is because people are not following the rules, people are not conforming, people are not getting the message. So generally, if ideas are working, if people are being conditioned enough to believe a certain idea, you won't need to bring in repression. And only now in the country people are talking about excessive repression needed, excessive force by the state, the army on the streets, because people are not social distancing, because people are not following the rules. However, in most times in our lives we don't see that. Most times the state uses ideology. It conditions people through institutions that basically ensure that people conform and obey because they take on the ideas that they are being taught. So the education system is a prime example for Louis Althusser. Religion would be a prime example of this. He does criticise humanism, as you can see in this image here with the puppet being controlled by the institutions. He doesn't see the puppet having its own consciousness. Every action, every thought, every process comes from those strings and being guided by a structure. He says that free will, choice and creativity are illusions. The social structure determines all, that man is a puppet being controlled by these forces. And he believes that we're not free. We are not able to make these complete choices for ourselves. We are in a state of false consciousness. And he doesn't believe that socialism will come about because of an expansion of consciousness, a counter-hegemony, a realisation, a seeing through of the lies transmitted by the system. It will emerge when there's an economic crisis, when there's overdetermination, and the three structures of society that generally work quite closely together most of the time will be pushed apart and they'll be relatively independent of each other. That is what will cause society to collapse. So he believes that when the economy is in such a mess, such a state, that other institutions may move away from supporting it. Alternative ideas might emerge within society. There isn't the guaranteed support of the other parts. So Althusser, very briefly, he's a bit harsh on humanism. He claims to reject economic determinism and then offers something which is pretty similar, really, the power of the structure and the like. Everything seems to focus on the economy being the starting point for revolutionary change. And there's humanistic critique of Althusser, that his viewpoint seems to discourage political activism. It makes out that intellectuals and ideas and groups of people cannot change the society they live in. He's also criticised for a degree of elitism, assuming that only a communist party can provide leadership to a mass of blindly following workers, but that's another story in itself. So, with that said, we are aware of where Marx stands, we're aware of the different ideas that he posited, we're now aware of how this has been developed by Gramsci and by Althusser, the difference between humanistic and scientific Marxism. Here's a little checklist of some of the concepts that you should now be aware of for answering a question like this. If you're to assess the contribution of Marxism, then it's vital that these ideas, these approaches, these things, all of those should be familiar to you. So what you need to do is you need to take each of those and draw up a glossary and just make sure that you've got a definition of what each of them means. I'll let you stop this and read that at your leisure, but this is from the examiner's report talking about what really good students did and what weaker students did in relation to answering that question. So if you want to pause the video now and watch that, do so. So, a little bit of consolidation. We need to ask ourselves, what is wrong with capitalism and why does it still survive? I recommend that you take the different topics we've looked at, family, education, and then just look for different examples of where Marx's ideas are reflected in your understanding of the family. Similarly, Gramsci, anything on the family, you won't find much there, by the way. And then Althusser on the family. Education, how these ideas from those three thinkers are reflected. And that's useful because it gives you synoptic connections to link to. And a really good starting point for analysing Marx is their arch rivals, I suppose. As you know, Marxism is a conflict theory, functions as a consensus theory, and they pivot around these different questions, how they see institutions differently, how they see social order, how they see the transmission of ideas. And if you were to complete this, fulfill the Marxist bit in first, while it's fresh on your mind, and then go back to your functionalism and just put those points in as well, you can start to see how functionalism can be used to challenge the Marxist position. And there's a range of concepts there, by the way, from a number of topics. And what you can try to do is to think, well, is this a functionist idea? Is it a Marxist idea? So totemism, where does that come from? Who would talk about totemism? How would Marxists challenge the totemism idea? How would they see the argument posited there? Warm bath theory, is it a functionist? Is it a Marxist idea? How is that viewed by Marxists? How would they see that? How would they challenge that? Vice versa, divine right of kings, how would it be seen? And that's a really good exercise just for teasing out illustrations of arguments and how they compare. And that is that. That's Marxism.